Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to do a quick run through virtue ethics. So I find with my students this is the one that it's not that it's more difficult necessarily, but people find it a little bit confusing because you haven't got kind of the hook into Christianity that you get with natural moral law and situation ethics. So I want to take you through some of the basics, particularly focusing on two really central concepts in Aristotle's virtue ethics. So firstly, we've got the golden mean, and secondly, we've got the concept of phronesis. I'm going to talk about other things as well, like eudaimonia, and a few other bits and pieces in virtue ethics, but I'll go through it as quick as I can, and hopefully it'll be useful. Okay, let's go. I want to start with this quote. Now, this is actually a quote from Aristotle. It's easy to fly into a passion, anyone can do that, but to be angry with the right person to the right extent, at the right time, in the right way, with the right aim, that is not easy. I think he's right about that. And it's interesting here, I think this quote's quite a good one to start with because it's about anger. And I think he's arguing here that sometimes something like anger can be a virtue. And that might seem strange because you might be thinking, well, it's not good to be angry. Anger is destructive, anger is aggressive. But this is the really important thing with virtue ethics and also with the golden mean. Sorry, I can hear a little bit of chirping. My cat's just spotted a magpie and is stalking it. With the virtues, it's not just about certain things are good and certain things are bad. It's all about different situations and different extents. So yeah, a lot of the time, it's not good to get angry because it doesn't get you anywhere. But if you're faced with, let's say, something like a terrible injustice, people are being treated really unfairly, people are being exploited, people are being taken advantage of, you could argue that actually anger is exactly the right response to that. Anger is, totally appropriate in that situation. But the key thing is being virtuous, getting that anger right. Anger with the right people, to the right extent, right time, right way, right aim. Aristotle's absolutely correct when he says that's not easy. So the whole point of virtue ethics is that you work on yourself. It's very much an ethical theory where you're playing the long game. You can't become virtuous overnight. And this brings us on to having a little look at the golden mean. So I've put it in a table here, and I've adapted this from Aristotle's version. So this isn't set in stone. You could do this with any kind of virtue. Down the middle of this table, we've got the golden mean of certain virtues, and these are ones that Aristotle particularly identified. So the golden mean is kind of the right amount of it. So the golden mean of courage, and then we've got two vices. The vice of excess is when you have too much of that thing, and the vice of deficiency is when you don't have enough of it. But again, like I say, this is flexible because it depends on who you are and what you do. So this is an example that you've probably come across before, but let's say that your job is that you're a firefighter. Now, a firefighter needs to have probably more than most people's average amount of courage in order to do their job well, because they literally have to go into burning buildings. So the golden mean of courage for a firefighter might be much closer to recklessness than it would be just to the middle, if you see what I mean. That doesn't mean that the firefighter actually is reckless, because of course they'll be trained, they'll be protected with equipment and all that sort of thing. But normally you or I wouldn't go into a burning building, but it's their job to, therefore they naturally need more courage. We can look at some of the others briefly as well. So we can see that, with generosity, if you're constantly flashing the cash and being overly generous and that's how you're getting friends, then we could say that's vulgarity. It's quite vulgar. It's not really a good vibe to do that. On the other hand, if you never put your hand in your pocket for your mate, that could be seen as stinginess. But that's going to depend on how capable you are of being generous. It's not virtuous to be generous to your mates and buy all the drinks if you can't pay your rent. So it's all about making these kind of little decisions all the time about where are you in terms of virtue. The one that's not like the others is justice. So Aristotle argued that you can't have too much justice. You kind of either have it or you don't. It's not got the excess. You could argue it's got a deficiency, but it doesn't have an excess. So next I want to look at two similar words that describe, where they're talking about the same concept, but it's good not to mix these up. So phronesis, this is the Greek word for practical wisdom. Practical wisdom essentially means making good choices. Sometimes people call it common sense. And it's an important virtue, firstly in itself, but also it can be a combination of lots and lots of different virtues. It's kind of a synergy of different virtues coming together. And Aristotle essentially says that as you get better at practical wisdom, as you gain more experience in making good choices, morality becomes easier. It gets to the point almost when you're a fully virtuous person where you don't even really have to think about it. But how do you get there? Well, one way, and probably the best way, is to follow a phronimos. So you can see, similar word, slightly different meaning. A phronimos is a person, it's a virtuous role model. Sometimes they get called moral exemplars. Everybody needs to learn how to be virtuous by watching virtuous people. And essentially by copying them, by learning from them, doing what they do. But it's not just what somebody does that makes them a phronimos, it's how they do it. What are their intentions? How do they go about it? An example that popped into my head when I was writing this would be someone like Marcus Rashford. So if you cast your mind back to at the beginning of the pandemic, Marcus Rashford sort of made a big campaign about feeding kids who would normally get free school meals but weren't because they weren't at school, and during the holidays and so on when people were really struggling. Now you could say that's an example of him being a virtuous role model because he didn't have to do that. And it actually kind of cost him to do it in some ways because he had a lot of abuse for it. He had a lot of people saying, oh, stick to football. But he saw something that he felt was a wrong and he used his platform to try and do something about it. You could argue that that's an example of a virtuous role model, because he could have just stayed quiet and not taken any of the flack. But he stood up for people who didn't have a voice like he did. You can probably think of lots more examples as well. So a little bit more on practical wisdom. It's really central to virtue ethics. The more phronesis a person has developed, the more likely they will be to be able to tell what's virtuous and what's not. You learn it from a phronimos. It's a habit. So this is what I mean about the long game. It needs to be developed and practiced over the long term. So we could link this to sport or music or anything you like. Just as a netball player gets more skillful by playing more and more netball, a person becomes more virtuous by practicing the virtues. So you can't get good at virtue ethics quickly, but you have to learn by doing. Intentions do come into this as well. This is what I've been saying all along. It's not just about actions. So you can't be virtuous by accident. You can only be virtuous if you genuinely know what you are doing. So an example, if you jump into a river to save a drowning child, you might say that's virtuous, and it might be. But if you jump in without thinking or knowing that it's dangerous to you too, then that isn't virtuous. You can only kind of get the credit for the virtue if you understand what it is you're engaged in. So in other words, people are only acting virtuously if their action is a reasoned choice. And the intentions have to be virtuous too. So if you make a reasoned choice not to overeat in order not to be greedy or self-indulgent, that's virtuous. But if you're only motivated by a wish to impress others, then that's not very virtuous. So if you decide not to eat the massive Easter egg because it would just be overindulgent to do so and it would be wiser to spread it out over a week or two, you could say that's virtuous. But if you decide not to eat it because you're worried someone will judge you and you want to impress them, not so much. So the summary of this is you only deserve praise or blame for actions that actually reveal your character. Because remember, virtue ethics is all about character. Something that you did as the result of a reasoned choice. Okay, so you probably know a little bit about eudaimonia, which means human flourishing, the kind of highest goal. But Aristotle does something a little bit weird when he writes about virtue ethics. He actually concludes that the way to eudaimonia was through something called theoria, or contemplation, rather than simply through moral virtue. Now, you might think that's weird because he's banged on and on about moral virtue and how important it is, and then he's suddenly saying it's not the most important thing. That is weird. So I'm going to take you through it a little bit. He thought that scientific investigation was the highest goal of reason and intelligence and was akin to contemplation of the divine. Now, he doesn't mean the Christian God. He just means kind of the highest level of thinking and contemplation that there is. But it's very scientific. And thinking about Aristotle, you can sort of see how he got there, because he was a philosopher, he was very interested in contemplation, he was very interested in science, and he probably didn't have to do as much kind of real world ethical behaviour as other people did. But it's odd that this is the natural conclusion of virtue ethics, which makes some people think that it shouldn't be. Firstly, because it's quite subjective, so it reflects what Aristotle was personally interested in, but what he likes shouldn't be what everyone else likes. So it can be seen as elitist, and Aristotle was part of the elite, so not everyone will have the ability or the opportunity to engage in high-level scientific contemplation, because most of us are just trying to get through the day. And if eudaimonia is about human flourishing, surely that's about developing a really well-rounded character without having one virtue superior to another. So I just wanted to touch on this because this is where Aristotle ends up, but there is a bit of a consensus that this is a slightly strange place to end up. Just so you know, you can't be asked about theoria. You won't be asked a question about this aspect of Aristotle thinking, but it's worth just kind of being aware that not all of his thinking is necessarily perfect. So the final thing I want to do is just shout out this video, which you might have come across actually, but if you haven't, you should absolutely watch it. So if you just put Barry Schwartz Practical Wisdom into YouTube, this video will come up. And it's a really, really, really good TED Talk that takes you through a modern understanding of what virtue looks like applied to real life, with this kind of understanding that virtue equals moral will plus moral skill. My students really enjoyed this video and they said they found it really, really helpful. And Barry Schwartz is a great communicator, so I really do recommend that you check that out. Okay, that's it for now. Hope that's been useful, and I'll see you soon. Look after yourselves.